Hey everyone, welcome to Locked On Lakers for Thursday. Brian Kamenetsky, Andy Kamenetsky. The Lakers get thumped in Cleveland, like really, really bad. So what's next? That's next.
You are Locked On Lakers, your daily Los Angeles Lakers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks to everybody for making Locked On Lakers your first listen of every day, Monday through Friday. No matter how or where you get your podcasts, this one's always free and never, ever, ever, ever behind a paywall. And of course, Locked On Lakers on YouTube is where you can go hang out with over 25,000 subscribers, Andy, all of whom learned very much so that you can lose games and do okay, and you can lose games and look like the Lakers did on Wednesday in Cleveland. Oh my, that was their first butt kicking. Legitimate butt kicking of the year. So plenty to talk about there. And as the Lakers finish up the road trip, 134 to 110, the final score there. Doing to let you know that today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win that first $5 bet. So visit FanDuel.com to get started. So, Andy, they lost their first game of the year on Monday in Phoenix, but that was a respectable game. You go out, you play a good team on the road. Sometimes you're going to lose. They got their butts kicked on Wednesday in Cleveland from the jump. The Cavs were all over them. The Lakers had zero response, and that one was oogly.
I cannot tell you how many different times in this game that Cleveland was on a blank to nothing run. Like it just felt like every time it was like this game was the basketball version of the movie Groundhog Day. Because I'm like, wait, didn't you just say that they were on a blank to nothing run? Like, I'm like,
I got you, babe.
Seriously, I'm like, wait, is there a glitch in my like DTV broadcast of this?
Where am I in the Matrix that I'm
yeah,
only in the part where the Lakers are constantly defending 13-0 runs?
Yeah, I mean, it just felt like from basically the jump of this game, the team was completely out of sync. They were sloppy with the ball throughout this entire game. I know that they shot 33 free throws. I think it's a little bit misleading in terms of what I'm about to talk about, just in terms of, I think, something indicative of them not playing well, not playing smart. They had Cleveland in the bonus in the first and the second quarters of this game. And, you know, they had Evan Mobley in foul trouble. Darius Garland picked up 2 fouls in like the first 3 minutes, something like that. And it didn't feel like they were looking to capitalize on a team that couldn't foul them. Either that or they couldn't take care of the ball well enough to capitalize on it. But just, there just felt like there was a lot of lacking awareness in this game.
Yeah, 6 turnovers for LeBron. It was part of it. I mean, statistically speaking, LeBron certainly bounced back from Monday's game, which, you know, I think you said one of the worst games of his career. I agreed. I'd said worst game as a Laker. You were willing to expand that, and I think it's certainly.
Well, you said arguably as a Laker. I said there is no argument as a Laker. This was clearly it. There's not even a close second.
He comes back with 26 points in this one, 9 of 13 from the floor, 7 of 7, 6 rebounds, 3 assists, 6 turnovers. The turnovers were obviously something that you might, a blemish on an otherwise pretty decent line. But, you know, what really stuck out to me, you mentioned the free throws for the Lakers, and, look, they pressed their advantage. LeBron was working very hard to get into the paint and, trying to press some advantage there. D'Angelo Russell, who suffered another poor shooting night, really struggled again from the field, 2 of 7. Overall, 0 of 3 from 3-point range, and early season shooting struggles continue for D'Lo. He did get to the line. He made 6 free throws. I mean, he and his 2 buckets were both at the rim. So,
he entered the game with that. He had been questionable at one point because of that sore lower back. He ended up playing, but You wonder how much that was bothering him. Austin
Maybe
Reaves,
how much it's
you know,
been bothering him all season, perhaps in terms of
yeah.
his shooting. And we'll get to Reaves. Reaves banged knees and was just sort of banged up all night. Anthony Davis fell on his hip early in the game, and then seemed to be aggravated pretty significantly throughout the rest of it. And so, like, the injury vibes are there. But what stuck out to me is the Cavs, in addition to shooting 41.5%, only shot 8 free throws in this game. And you could say, Andy, maybe that's an indication the Lakers did a decent job in the paint. Maybe it means that they, really defended without fouling. I would say it's because they weren't close enough to Cleveland to actually touch them for most of this game. They were so bad defensively and so late on rotations and giving up so many open shots. They didn't have the opportunity to foul the Cavs in any way that would send Cleveland to the line.
Yeah, it was the first time this season where the Lakers just looked bad in a game. And to be clear, I am not worried, certainly not 5 games in, that they are a bad team. Like, I don't think they are a bad team. I don't think they're going to perform this season like a bad team. But you and I have covered championship teams, and sometimes even championship teams on the wrong night look like bad teams. And if a championship team can look like a bad team on occasional nights, a team that we are not even sure can win a championship, even if they're good, are definitely capable of looking bad. Like the loss to Phoenix, there were mistakes made. There were things that you would love to have back, but they did not play badly in that game. They did not look like a bad team against Phoenix. They looked bad against Cleveland. There was no way around it.
Yeah, and I think, and we can talk a little bit more about this after the break, but I mean, I think in games like this, the shortcomings of the team feel worse. I looked it up. I was surprised. The Lakers are, I want to say, like 17th or 18th in the league in 3-point shooting. It kind of feels worse than that, but then I forgot, second game of the season, that second game they were at 50%, they had a night there and whatever. But in this one, they were well below that, 21% from 3-point range. Obviously, the opener, they were very low from 3. Didn't shoot the 3 ball great on Monday either. But, it doesn't feel like this is a team that's shooting the ball to its capabilities or to its need from 3-point range. The bench, while you end up with 18 points from Dalton Connect, a lot of that comes late. The bench was still problematic. Gabe Vincent hit an early 3 and then was pretty quiet after that. Max Christie was 1 of 6 from the floor, 1 of 5 from 3-point range. Just, you're not getting much from those guys. I actually thought Jackson Hayes was one of the few guys who seemed to be playing at the speed the Cavaliers were playing, but you cannot expect Jackson Hayes to lift your team and carry you, in ways like that. He did what he was supposed to do.
Not unless you're back in high school or something.
Right. I mean,
we're well past that.
Look, the guy's going to play for, has a chance to play for 7, 8, 9 years in the NBA at least. Like, that's awesome. He's really good at basketball, but relative to his peers, that's not something he can do.
And you also mentioned
certain things here are just unsustainable. Like they have to find a way to get more from the bench.
You mentioned the Dalton Connect, it being somewhat backloaded. The 18 points that he had, it's entirely backloaded. They were all in the fourth quarter, much of which came
I thought,
in
like,
garbage time.
In my mind, a couple of buckets came a little earlier, but I knew most of it was long after the game was decided.
All 18 points were in the fourth quarter. He was 6 of 9 in the fourth, 2 of 4 from behind the arc, 4 of 4 at the line. And look, in a vacuum, that is great for Dalton Connect because all the run he can get, all the confidence that he can get is awesome. And you and I have no doubts that he's an NBA player. He's an NBA scorer. Fine. But it is indicative of the bench not doing nearly enough when it succeeds the most when the game doesn't matter.
After the break, let's get a little bit in the injury stuff, but I want to talk about the next 2 games because they are really, important, about as important as games can be when they're the sixth and seventh games of the season. So we'll get to that next.
Locked On Lakers brought to you by FanDuel. NFL fans, you can enjoy a big season with FanDuel and a big return on your season on FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. Let's just say you get a hunch in the middle of a game. It feels like you are able to anticipate everything before it happens. Every big touchdown run, every big touchdown pass, a big turnover waiting to happen, just a critical sack. You know everything before it's going to take place, but you just want to make sure, am I really feeling this out right? You can check out the latest stats view, live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. And you can get started with $200 in bonus bets, guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. And obviously, our friends at FanDuel have options for you for this NBA season. So make sure you are checking that out as well. That's FanDuel.com.
Quick reminder for folks, if you cannot get enough of this, and I can't imagine how you could, the Locked On Lakers newsletter, lockedondaily.com. You go to that and you can subscribe to the newsletter for this show and basically have it delivered. This NBA information, all kinds of stuff, different thoughts. We'll have polls in there. We'll have big questions that we're asking and stuff like that. So more content from us and from around the NBA. LockedOnDaily.com is where you go to sign up. So this becomes like a gut check moment for this team, because we talked like, 3 playoff teams that you're going to see. The Cavaliers are arguably the best team in basketball right now. They are undefeated and they're playing very well. They have not really struggled much at all. And they've got a really good roster that kind of fell apart last year in terms of injuries. And that's a little why they didn't maybe rise as high as they could have. But anyway, you have Phoenix, you have Cleveland, you finish with Memphis. The 2 games they got coming up with Toronto and Detroit, those are games you have to win. If you think you're a team that can play near the top of the Western Conference, that wants to be near the top of the Western Conference, when you have the third and fourth games of a 5-game trip through 2 lottery teams, and that's the middle of the sandwich with the playoff teams, you have to win those games. You have to.
Especially we know Detroit is a bad team. They've been a bad team and a mess for several years, and
although they did win on Wednesday, for what
their direction is, to put it kindly, not discernible. But Toronto, they just lost their best player. Scotty Barnes is going to be out for a few weeks with, I believe, an orbital fracture. So
correct.
You're talking about a weakened team that is in flux, that does not have their best player. This is a game the Lakers should win anyway, but it is now absolutely inexcusable to lose it. Like there is no way you could possibly justify losing that game. Detroit, it goes without saying, but to speak to that importance that you're talking about, worst comes to worst, you end up 2-3 on this road trip, which is not necessarily what you want, but it is acceptable given the competition. Yeah. If you are 1-4 on this road trip, that is flat out just not acceptable.
Yeah, you come back 4-4. It's a bad result, and
it starts changing the taste in your mouth of the way this season began. It starts to make you second guess perhaps some of the good things that have happened. Maybe it shouldn't.
Was that early 3-game run more fluky than anything else?
Right. It's against a Minnesota team that is still learning itself. It took LeBron turning back the clock in a massive way against Sacramento. Like, was the loss to Phoenix more real than the win against Phoenix? Like, again, it's too small sample size to make too much out of anything, but that doesn't mean that your mind won't start creeping.
It's and it's going to be with a little bit of adversity. I mean, I realize, these 2 teams are kind of going to play next are not good, but Anthony Davis is clearly banged up, and he's going to keep playing. His numbers excuse me, his numbers on Wednesday weren't bad. 9 of 17, 13 rebounds, 2 assists, 2 steals, 22 points overall. Only played 31 minutes. And if that's the worst game you've played this year, you're off to a pretty good start. But you could see that he was both hobbled and frustrated. And I think one of the things that was most irritating to watch, and I got the impression from JJ Redick after the game, for him to watch too, the Lakers spent an awful lot of time not getting calls and not going to play defense after it. And AD was one of the major culprits of that. Now, he got hit in the face early in the game and, was clearly shaken up by that. Strange to me that JJ Redick didn't call timeout while AD was clearly struggling a little bit. But he got fouled underneath a little, a couple times, and sort of jogged back and was looking at the refs while Jared Allen ran right by him and scored.
Yep.
I mean, stuff like that. It just, as a team, and it wasn't just AD, as a team, they were way too in their feelings when it came to the refs. I went on a bit of a tangent there, but you have guys that are going to be hurt, and your good vibes are gone, and it's not going to be easy. You're going to have to figure out ways to win these games.
Yeah, and look, there are going to be nights where you don't have it. And again, I am not going to be reading too much into what happened in this game, because these are things that happen to great teams. Like the Celtics are off to a great start again this season, and they are the defending champions. I can promise you there will be at least one night, if not a handful of nights this season, where they look like ass. And you wonder, how on earth is this team the defending champion? Like,
there won't be as many of those games as Lakers fans would like.
Sure.
But there'll be a couple.
It's gonna happen. This is just the course of the season. But to your point, though, this was a night that, if nothing else, will bother Laker fans, because it did underscore some of the concerns that you have about this team broadly, and some of the weaknesses that have crept in even when they've won throughout the course of this season.
I look at it too. It's like they're 3-2. There's a lot of glass half full ways to do this. You're getting good performances from Anthony Davis, and assuming he can stay healthy, feels sustainable. He's certainly capable of playing at an MVP level and is playing with a chip on his shoulder, which sometimes makes that easier. The biggest questions to me, for example, I have a friend of, guy we know that texts me all, huge Laker fan. Whenever things start going wrong, I have 800 texts about everything that's going on with this team.
He's a panicker.
He is. He's really worried about D'Lo right now. I am not, because D'Lo is actually point guarding pretty well. Even in this game, had some, solid passes and stuff like that, whatever, moving the offense along. Defense wasn't great tonight. He had company. The shot, I'm going to need more than a 5-game sample, because I've seen, 8 years, 10 years of D'Angelo Russell at this point, being a pretty good offensive player and a good shooter. But at some point, concern over Max Christie, for example, becomes legitimate. I've seen some people defending him, that he's still being used wrong and all these other things. And okay, at some point, if you have to be catered to, like, you can't play with this guy, you can't play with this guy, you can't do this, you can't do this, you can only do this and that. And if the coaches aren't deploying you in that right way, well, then you can only play about 7 minutes a game, or, then, that can,
I don't know about that.
Be able to play.
I think a big problem for Christie right now is that he and Gabe Vincent do not work as a backcourt.
That is correct.
I think
my next point is that Vincent has been equally problematic, and in theory, those guys are going to play together, and trying to figure out ways for them not to play together really screws with your rotation.
It seems like they are having a difficult time either landing on a role for Vincent, or it's becoming more clear that if Vincent does not have a certain amount of usage that he did get more of in Miami, because they didn't have as many ball handlers and they had more injuries, and you're not going to get it on this team, that his utility may dramatically decrease. It's also become very clear that Gabe Vincent, on a team where they've seriously expected to have traded D'Angelo Russell by now, and he's still on this team, Gabe Vincent becomes a very different player and potentially not as useful a player.
Yeah, I mean, look, and I think he's a good player. I think, they
I'm
signed
not
him
arguing against that.
right. I don't think he's a great player, and he's not an explosive scorer. He's not all these other. He's a solid defender. Can play somebody. They need more from it. They just need. He's not terribly dynamic, and I don't think he was a particularly dynamic player even in Miami. He fits that system, very gritty, very on point in terms of what he's supposed to be doing and when. But whether it's because he doesn't have the ball enough, whether it's because he's still kind of knocking off some rust from having played very little NBA basketball over the last year and change, whatever it is, he's not been very good. Last year you could certainly blame it on the injury. The first games this year you can call it rust, whatever it is. Whatever the explanation is, he's not been very good. And so you combine that with Christie, you combine that with the road ahead for somebody like Connect in real rotation minutes, not the garbage time stuff from Wednesday. It's going to get harder for Connect because he is now officially on every scouting report. He is, veterans do not like being lit up by rookies, all this other stuff. So, it's going to be harder for him to make an impact. And if he's going to be up and down and Christie's going to be up and down, and like, who do you look at on that bench to provide a little bit of punch? It's a tricky situation. So a little more about that. Some happy news for Bronny James, and the way the game played out. The second Bron moment didn't happen. It is interesting, Andy. We can talk about it. The Lakers were reportedly planning on getting Bronny and Bron back together on the floor in that game. So we'll get to that next. So you and I, Andy, were both really hoping that the Lakers would not try to engineer another Bron moment, despite the game being in Cleveland, which, yes, folks, we know he grew up in Akron. We know, close enough. Okay. And so this is, it's a homecoming game for LeBron. It's, where Bronny grew up and all that kind of stuff. And it's a big deal and whatever. And I get the impulse to try to put them on the floor together. But you and I were both hoping that they wouldn't. By all accounts and by all reports, they were going to, if the game allowed it. I would say if there's one silver lining to them falling behind by 18, it was that they couldn't engineer this moment in any way that wasn't totally ridiculous and credibility destroying. And so it didn't happen.
And you know what? Bronny ended up playing at the end of this game, where you would normally play a deep reserve.
Last guy off the bench, as it should have been.
He's playing in a blowout. He would normally enter a game in a blowout in either direction at this point. And here's what I actually really liked about it. First of all, Bronny did a good enough job. Like, he had a really nice jumper that he connected on. He had a couple
mid-range
assists.
baseline thing for his first NBA points.
Yeah, it was a really nice sequence. He had a couple assists. He had a steal. And the moment got to be his. It actually got to be his moment, which the crowd was really excited about. They were chanting for Bronny. Like, it reflects something you and I have both said a lot, that however controversial and polarizing Bronny on this roster is for a lot of Laker fans, a lot of media, whatever, it's not about Bronny. Nobody seems to dislike Bronny. People seem to be genuinely rooting for Bronny. You and I have said many times, he strikes us as a really grounded, hardworking young man who wants to be taken seriously and wants to be respected on his own merits. Like, he understands, I'm LeBron James's son. I know what these moments mean for my dad. I understand the history of it all. And I'm sure the moment on the court meant something to him, but I think it's also pretty clear he wants to be taken seriously because he earned the right to be taken seriously. And I feel like this played out perfectly because, again, he went out there, he played fine. He had moments where he looked good, and it got to be all his. And it didn't feel manufactured, and it didn't feel like it was about something else. Like, how do LeBron and Bronny engineer the moment together? Like,
Or
I
just,
thought this was great.
and it doesn't hurt the credibility of, it's like if you put it, you're down by 15, down by 16. If you put them on the floor, then you are clearly prioritizing things that aren't winning over winning.
You mean in the second quarter, to be clear?
You put them in, you're down 15, 16 points in the second quarter, which is when this probably would have happened if they were up 15. In which case I would have felt still like, I don't like this. I don't think you should do it, but it's still better, I guess, than trying to do it when you're playing catch up.
Well, you clearly can't do it then.
Right. I mean, if I'm Bronny, I'm like, I'm taking off my shoes. Like I'm not going to the game. Like, so I think it was off the table, and I don't think there was any real temptation to try to be like, well, can we do it for a minute? Like, the answer is no. If the circumstances were perfect, I understand the impulse of, wouldn't it be cool for Bronny and Braun to play together in Cleveland? It is not one of these places. It's not like baseball where you visit Colorado 16 times over the course of a season. You got one game in Cleveland, and okay, I mean, I understand the impulse, but I think ultimately the Lakers dodged a bullet here, because if they are trying to be taken seriously, and they are, this doesn't help. Like, once you get past the moment of history, which happened, at that point you have to project that you are all about winning. And it's not just what people like you and I say. It's also what people think inside the locker room. And while I think in that locker room, everybody respects LeBron so much and enough that, like, okay, they get it. Everybody recognizes the significance of it from a kind of a family and emotional standpoint. But I could also see guys being like, come on, like, we're trying to win a game here.
Right.
And you're putting a kid out there, like, and if it just chips away a tiny bit at the credibility that Redick has built up with this group this early in the season, it is so not worth it. And so in that sense, they dodged a bullet and are probably better off than they otherwise would have been.
Yeah, and again, I thought it was cool
none of this has to do with Bronny, by the way. 100%.
No, I thought it was really cool that Bronny just entered a game. People were excited to see him play. He did a good job on the court, and the cheers were earned. Like, they were truly earned. Like, the people that were excited to see him got to see Bronny just perform a normal basketball game. For real, I think that's great.
It will be there aren't going to be many other, I can't think of other play. I mean, Miami, like when they go there, like, is there going to be a temptation to put them, like, so in theory, this is kind of it, right? And the G League season opens next week, and the Lakers are going to send him there. I was just flipping through sports radio, and they were going through all these sort of what if scenarios around Bronny and Braun. And, you know, what if LeBron demands that he stay on with the team all season? Okay, well, he's not going to, like, you know, like these are not things that are going to happen. He's going to go down to the G League and play. And
okay, you know what?
Going to get back to normal.
Let me just say right now, if LeBron actually did that, and I want to emphasize this strenuously, he won't. But if he did, I think they'd actually tell him no. They would actually say, we cannot do
Can't do that. It's bad for Bronny. It's bad for his
It's bad for Bronny, and it's bad for the team. And eventually this is going to start to become a thing that nobody's going to want to deal with. Again, cannot emphasize this enough. LeBron's not going to do that. But if he did, I think the answer would actually be no.
So again, I am looking very much towards these next two games as a real litmus test for who they are. And, if they come out and play with the same level of intensity, meaning not nearly enough, whether it's against Toronto or Detroit, it's going to say something. You come out and play really, really hard. I mean, Toronto catches fire, maybe Detroit catches fire. Like sometimes weird things happen. And those games probably aren't going to be blowouts the way that fans would want them to be. But especially if AD is hurt, especially if Austin Reaves is banged up or whatever, kind of what do you look like as a team? How much give a bleep can you project for these games and make sure you come home to play a limping Philadelphia team when this road trip is over? Make sure you come home with a winning record. I think it's really important. Locked On Lakers on YouTube is where you can go hang out with over 25,000 subscribers. Remember, lockedondaily.com is where you go get the newsletter, sign up for Locked On Lakers. And as Andy said, we'll see everyone on Friday.